December of 2017, snow outside, lightsaber fire inside. Star Wars: The Last Jedi opens worldwide with a reported production budget hovering around $200 million, not counting the marketing blitz that likely pushed the total cost closer to $350 million. Mark Hamill is back as Luke Skywalker for the first time in decades. Carrie Fisher's final performance, Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Adam Driver, Oscar Isaac, all returning from The Force Awakens, which had just crossed $2 billion worldwide. Disney is expecting another easy win. Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy has already announced something extraordinary. The man behind this movie, independent filmmaker Rian Johnson, is set to write and direct an entirely new Star Wars trilogy, separate from the Skywalker saga. The message is clear. This isn't a one-off hire. This is the future. On Rotten Tomatoes, the critics' score starts sky high, 91%.
Off the Han Solo project that maybe they would get him in instead, and some people are scratching their heads when they didn't. Well, now maybe we know why. It looks like Disney has been in talks with Rian Johnson to direct not one, not two, but three, a brand new Star Wars trilogy that he is set to write and direct. Now, if Rian Johnson writing and directing a brand
93% if you look only at the top critics. The pull quotes are glowing, bold, subversive, the best since The Empire Strikes Back. Cinema Score exit polling from opening night returns a solid A from general audiences, the same grade The Force Awakens got. The box office explodes, $1.334 billion worldwide, the highest grossing film of 2017. From the outside, everything looks perfect. Disney is counting money. Awards pundits are writing think pieces about how Star Wars just grew up. Lucasfilm is talking confidently about Rian Johnson's new trilogy. So, what could possibly go wrong? Within days, a second story emerges. The Rotten Tomatoes audience score drops into the 50s, 56%, then 54%. That is a 37-point gap between critics and audiences, the largest divide in Star Wars history.
Is showing plenty of force at multiplexes worldwide with $745.4 million globally as of Sunday. The North American take has hit $365 million in its first 10 days as of Sunday, with the studio projecting another $32 million on Christmas Day. On
message boards flood with posts. Rian Johnson ruined Luke. This isn't my Star Wars. Let the past die? Okay, I'm out. Accusations start flying that angry fans or bots must be review bombing the movie. Rotten Tomatoes steps in and, awkwardly for defenders, confirms the score is authentic. No bot conspiracy, just a very real split. You have, in the same movie, an A cinema score, a 91% critics rating, and the lowest audience score in the franchise since Attack of the Clones. Somehow, the guy who just delivered a $1.3 billion hit has become the most hated man in a galaxy far, far away. To understand how that happened, and how it somehow made his career better, you have to rewind. Back before Disney, before Netflix money, before the word subversion became a meme attached to his name. Back to a movie made with less money than The Last Jedi probably spent on porgs. In 1997, a 20-something Rian Johnson writes a script in his bedroom. It's called Brick, a hard-boiled detective story set in a modern American high school. Think Dashiell Hammett slang meets locker hallways. It is weird, ambitious, and not exactly what studios are begging for. Nobody bites. Years pass. Johnson takes editing work, directs music videos, keeps rewriting. He has no famous producer backing him, no franchise brand, no studio safety net. What he does have is a group of friends and family willing to bet on him. Brick ends up being financed basically on favors and savings for about $450,000. It finally goes into production in 2003. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, still in his post-Child Star, pre-Inception period, signs on as the lead.
At the end of the day, getting the money for it was the toughest thing, and that was like a 6-year process for me from when I wrote the script to when we started shooting. We tried a lot of different routes. We went through traditional routes to like production companies and tried to get them to sign on board. We tried to get like name actors attached and get funding that way. And just nothing worked. A lot of frustration, a lot of it almost coming together.
The crew is tiny. The locations are borrowed. The style is uncompromising. No one is thinking, this guy will direct Star Wars one day. They're thinking, please just let this play at a festival. 2005, Sundance Film Festival. Brick premieres. It wins a special jury prize for originality of vision. Critics latch onto that phrase because this is the pattern with Rian Johnson. He does not make bland choices. He either hits big or misses loud. Brick goes on to score around 80% on Rotten Tomatoes and gross $3.9 million worldwide. On a $450,000 budget, that's a win. More important than the box office, it launches two key things: his reputation as a writer-director with a distinct voice and a partnership with Joseph Gordon-Levitt that will run through several of his early projects. Fast forward through his second feature, The Brothers Bloom, to 2012, when Johnson makes Looper. This is his first real step into studio-scale sci-fi. Time travel, Bruce Willis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt again. A budget reportedly around $30 million. It pulls in roughly $177 million worldwide. Solid hit. Critics like it. Audience word of mouth is strong. But his next project might be the one that quietly seals his reputation with people inside the industry. Enter Vince Gilligan and Breaking Bad. Johnson directs 3 episodes. 2 of them are infamous for very different reasons. One is Fly, a bottle episode from season 3. Almost the entire hour is set in a single location with Walt and Jesse trying to catch, yes, a fly in the meth lab. Fans are split. Some hate it, some love it. On IMDb, Fly sits as one of the lowest rated episodes in the entire series, at around 7.8 out of 10. For Breaking Bad, that's low. The other episode is Ozymandias from season 5. This is the one where everything falls apart. Family, empire, the whole thing. Vince Gilligan himself has called it the best episode we ever have had or ever will have. On IMDb, Ozymandias becomes the unicorn, the only television episode to hold a perfect 10 out of 10 with a huge number of votes, and it keeps that status for years. Same director, same show. He's behind the single highest rated and one of the lowest rated episodes. The pattern is already there. Rian Johnson makes choices that swing for the fences. When they connect, they're legendary. When they don't, they stick out. Hollywood pays attention to that. Lucasfilm especially. After Disney buys Lucasfilm in the early 2010s and revives Star Wars with The Force Awakens in 2015, there is one big question. How do you keep this franchise from going stale? J.J. Abrams delivers a nostalgic crowd pleaser with The Force Awakens. It makes about $2.07 billion worldwide. The safe move would be to keep J.J. in the driver's seat. Instead, Lucasfilm brings in Rian Johnson to write and direct Episode 8, a director with one low-budget high school noir, a clever time travel thriller, and some standout TV episodes. Now has the keys to the most valuable movie brand on Earth. The signal internally is that they want something bold. Externally, Disney downplays any risk. Second movie in the new trilogy, giant built-in audience, what could possibly go wrong? Behind the scenes, Johnson is not shy about his intentions. He talks about approaching The Last Jedi with one guiding thought: the worst thing he could do is play it safe. He'll later say things like, the worst sin is to handle it with kid gloves, and that he wasn't afraid of shaking it up. He openly admits he was hoping for strong reactions, that he'd rather make something people argue about than something they forget. This is not the mindset of a filmmaker trying to preserve a museum piece. This is someone looking at a 40-year-old myth and asking, what if I break it on purpose and see what falls out? Over the years of development, that philosophy seeps into every major decision. Character arcs? Don't just continue them. Break them and rebuild them.
You're going to find very few fans out there whose lists line up, and I knew if I wrote wondering what the fans would want, as tempting as that is, it wouldn't work, because people would still be shouting at me, F you ruined Star Wars, and I would make a bad movie. And ultimately, that's the one thing nobody wants.
Luke Skywalker, the hero of generations, is introduced not as the serene Jedi Master people imagine, but as a bitter, disillusioned hermit on Ahch-To who wants the Jedi Order to end. In the very first big moment, Rey handing him the lightsaber that ended The Force Awakens on an operatic cliffhanger, he tosses it over his shoulder like a joke. Tone? Don't just do mythic solemnity. Inject comedy into places fans don't expect. Opening the movie with Poe prank, calling General Hux. Luke brushing off his shoulder after being attacked by walkers, scenes that some fans see as classic Star Wars banter, others see as Marvel-style undercutting. Lore? Instead of deepening the mystique of the Jedi text, Johnson has Yoda burn down the tree and laughs about page-turners. Later, he reveals that Rey's parents are nobodies if you stick strictly to what Kylo says in this film. No secret Skywalker bloodline, no grand destiny. Anyone can be powerful. To some, that's a powerful democratizing idea. To others, it feels like taking a sledgehammer to one of Star Wars' favorite fan theories machines. And then, there's Luke's fate. Johnson invents a new Force ability, astral projection across the galaxy, so Luke can face Kylo without ever leaving the island, then die from the effort, fading into the twin suns. It's poetic for some, infuriating for others. Mark Hamill himself publicly says he had to treat this version as Jake Skywalker because he didn't recognize the Luke he had played for decades. He walks that statement back diplomatically later, but the quote lives on forever in YouTube compilations. Meanwhile, Johnson's own mindset is shaped by something most viewers don't know about: his Christian upbringing and his eventual move away from conservative evangelicalism. He will later spell this out more openly around 2025, tying The Last Jedi's questions about faith, failure, and institutional rot directly to his experience of doubt and disillusionment with the church. In that light, Luke isn't just a grumpy old guy. He's a fallen believer who watched his religion fail spectacularly and now thinks the most honest thing he can do is shut it down. Kylo's "let the past die, kill it if you have to" isn't just villain talk. It's the film's thesis colliding with the audience's nostalgia. Even Rey's arc, looking for belonging in old myths and being told she has to find meaning without a famous surname, lines up with Johnson's fascination with what happens when belief systems stop working. The problem? For a huge slice of the Star Wars fanbase, Star Wars is the belief system. It's their myth, their comfort food, their Sunday service. So when a movie comes along that essentially says, "Hey, that thing you worship? Maybe it's time to grow past it," they don't nod thoughtfully. They get mad. This is where the disconnect starts to harden into something bigger. From the studio's side, everything before release looks like a dream. Kathleen Kennedy is so impressed with Johnson's script that even before The Last Jedi hits theaters, Lucasfilm announces he will create an entirely new Star Wars trilogy. No Skywalkers, no Death Stars. This is unprecedented trust. It also raises expectations. Fans assume Disney has seen The Last Jedi and thinks, we want 3 more of that. From the outside, all the signs are good. There are no reported huge reshoots like Rogue One, no director firings like with Solo. Disney seems calm. The budget grows as these movies do, but not catastrophically, around $200 million to make, another $100 to $150 million in global marketing. But with The Force Awakens as a reference point, that feels safe. The second JJ film just made $2 billion. If Johnson can get anywhere close, everyone's happy. The warning signs come from a different direction entirely, not from behind the scenes, but from the fandom itself. As trailers drop, a few people pick up on the hints. Luke saying, "This is not going to go the way you think." Kylo smashing his helmet, visually rejecting the Darth Vader cosplay built up in the previous movie. Posters where Rey is centered with a suspiciously red lightsaber glow. Johnson teasing in interviews that he wants to play with expectations. Most mainstream outlets treat this as good news. After decades of rhyming story beats, maybe Star Wars is finally going to surprise people. Meanwhile, on forums and YouTube, there's a nervous question forming. Surprise? How? Cut back to that opening weekend. The movie itself is a Rorschach test. One side of the reaction, critics. Film writers praise The Last Jedi as a meditation on hero worship. They love the way it undercuts the idea of perfect legends. They write essays about the throne room scene where Rey and Kylo team up, only to split ideologically. They like that the movie tells you anyone can be a hero, that failure is the best teacher, that the Force belongs to everyone. They see all the spiritual questioning and moral ambiguity and think finally, something interesting. On the other side, a significant slice of the fan base.
This time, it's personal.
They walk out feeling, essentially, why did this movie spend 2.5 hours explaining why Star Wars is kind of dumb? Common complaints flood Reddit and Twitter. It dismissed all the mysteries from The Force Awakens. Luke would never try to kill his nephew in his sleep. He throws his father's lightsaber like it's a joke. He never even reads the sacred text. He dies from forced Skyping? Really? Then there's the meta-narrative. Both Luke and Kylo, hero and villain, keep repeating variations of the same line. Let the past die. Some fans hear that and think, okay, cool, pass the torch. Others hear, everything you loved about this series is childish baggage. One social media comment that pops up years later when Johnson ties the movie to Christianity sums it up perfectly. If Star Wars is like Christianity, then what Rian Johnson did to it was definitely blasphemy. Meanwhile, Johnson is doing interviews saying that he loves Star Wars, but that the worst thing to do would be to just make fans comfortable. He doubles down on scenes people find jarring, the humor, the tonal shifts, by saying, that kind of goofiness has always been in Star Wars. He points to Ewoks, to Luke falling into the Rancor pit. To him, this isn't sacrilege, it's continuity. The numbers capture the split. 91% critics score, around 54 to 56% audience score. That 37-point gap becomes the statistic everyone quotes. Cinema Score, which polls general audiences as they leave theaters across the country, gives it an A. That suggests the general public is mostly fine. But the online Star Wars fandom, the people who drive the conversation for years, is deeply divided. Disney's immediate concern is different: money. The Last Jedi still makes $1.334 billion worldwide. It slightly underperforms The Force Awakens, but not by a margin that would normally trigger panic. The bigger financial problem turns up 2 years later with The Rise of Skywalker. That movie, scrambling to fix The Last Jedi by walking back many of its choices, Rey suddenly is a Palpatine, Kylo rebuilds the mask, somehow Palpatine returned, comes in dramatically lower at the box office and gets mixed reviews.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're talking about the forecasting going on right now for the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker box office, and the numbers really aren't looking that great in comparison to the other two films in the sequel trilogy. Now the numbers are still looking well enough for the film to potentially make some profit, even to hit the $1 billion mark. However, based on these early...
Now the question inside the company isn't just, did Rian Johnson break Star Wars? It's, did Disney's attempt to course correct make things worse? The trilogy looks like 3 different visions stapled together. J.J. Abrams sets some mysteries up. Rian Johnson throws most of them out. Abrams comes back and resurrects others. The corporate decision to steer this multi-billion-dollar series without a solid roadmap ends up magnifying every controversial choice. And what about that new Rian Johnson trilogy Lucasfilm announced with such confidence? By the early 2020s, it quietly drifts into limbo. Lucasfilm never officially cancels it, which lets everyone keep pretending it's still in development. But behind the scenes, something else has happened that makes the question kind of moot. Enter Knives Out. Rian Johnson goes back to his roots, an original script, no pre-sold IP, no legacy characters. Just a modern Agatha Christie-style whodunit, Benoit Blanc as a Southern detective played by Daniel Craig, an ensemble cast, and a modest budget, $40 million, for a star-studded studio mystery that is downright conservative. Knives Out releases in 2019. It's an instant hit. Critics rave, audiences love it. It earns around $312.9 million worldwide on that $40 million budget. That is an astonishing multiple. Cinema Score, an A-. Awards, an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay. It's not just the money, it's the vibe. This movie is fun, it's twisty, it's political without preaching. Online, you see something you didn't during the Last Jedi fight. Fans who hated Johnson's Star Wars movies saying, I still can't stand The Last Jedi, but Knives Out was great. For maybe the first time, you get a clear separation between Rian Johnson, Star Wars heretic, and Rian Johnson, clever mystery writer. Hollywood, which always follows the money, takes notice, and so does Netflix. In March of 2021, Netflix drops what might be the most jaw-dropping number in this entire story, $450 million. That's what they reportedly pay for 2 Knives Out sequels. Let that sink in. From $450,000 on Brick to $450 million for 2 scripts, scaled up by 3 zeros. The deal is wild even by streaming land standards. Each film must have a budget of at least $40 million. Daniel Craig has to star in both, and Johnson, along with his producing partner Ram Bergman, gets full creative control. No giant story group, no continuity Bible to obey, no rage-filled fandom that grew up on Benoit Blanc lunchboxes. Reports say around $100 million of that deal is going to Johnson himself, another $100 million to Craig, another huge chunk to Bergman. At the time, it's the richest single filmmaker deal in streaming history, without Star Wars, without spin-off toys, just off the back of a $40 million original movie. The irony writes itself. The director some fans declare canceled after The Last Jedi has just secured the kind of life-changing, studio-level backing most filmmakers dream about. And he did it not by apologizing for his Star Wars decisions, but by walking away and proving he could generate hits on his own. Meanwhile, what's happening with that Lucasfilm trilogy? By 2025, Johnson is pretty blunt. In interviews, he says the trilogy was never more than early brainstorming and that it's not happening anytime soon. No treatments, no scripts. The success of Knives Out and the Netflix deal pulled him in another direction. Lucasfilm moves on to shows like The Mandalorian, Andor, and other films. Rian Johnson's Star Wars future is effectively dead, not with a firing, but with a scheduling shrug. While all of this is going on, Johnson keeps doing what he does best, doubling down on the stuff people argue about. He talks more openly about how his Christian upbringing shaped The Last Jedi. He explains that he filtered the story through questions of faith, moral failure, and spiritual doubt. For some fans, this retroactively deepens the film. For others, it confirms their worst suspicions, that he was using Star Wars to work out his personal spiritual baggage rather than honoring the saga. On social media, reactions range from thoughtful to brutal. One comment that gets widely shared: he literally turned Luke into an ex-evangelical pastor who shut down the church and burned the Bible. How did they think this would go over? Another says, if Star Wars is a religion, Rian Johnson is the reformer nailing his theses to the door. Supporters call it sophisticated. Detractors call it self-indulgent. The pattern from Breaking Bad repeats on a bigger scale. Ozymandias and Fly. The Last Jedi's 91% critic score and 54% audience score. Knives Out's warm reception across the board. Extreme reactions stacked side by side. Then, Netflix releases Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery in late 2022. Cost, again in the $40 million range. Netflix experiments with a limited theatrical run, about 600 theaters, 1 week only. The movie reportedly makes around $15 million in that tiny window, which, if extrapolated to a wide release, could have meant serious box office. Then, it moves to streaming, where it becomes one of Netflix's biggest hits of the year. Again, critics are in, audiences are in. Benoit Blanc is now a franchise, and interestingly, the discourse this time isn't how dare he, it's more like, is this one as good as Knives Out, or just slightly less good? The temperature has dropped. When there are complaints, they're normal sequel complaints, not theological wars. By the mid-2020s, Johnson has unexpectedly become a key voice in a bunch of industry debates. He criticizes generative artificial intelligence, calling it something that's making everything worse in every single way, and openly questions what happens to film as an art form when studios chase algorithm-friendly content instead of giving weirdos like him a shot. He also publicly disagrees with Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos on the idea that theatrical moviegoing is outdated. Johnson insists that theaters still matter and pushes for his Knives Out movies to get real runs, not just token releases. You have this surreal picture. The man at the heart of one of the loudest fan wars in modern movie history is now arguing for old-school cinema values against the very streaming giant that paid him $450 million. The corporate paradox in human form. Streaming deals make his creative freedom possible, but his heart is still in dark rooms with sticky floors and big screens. Then comes the third Benoit Blanc film, Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. Released in December of 2025 on Netflix, after another short theatrical window, it lands with the kind of numbers that make executives breathe easier. In its first week, it racks up about 20.2 million views and roughly 49.2 million hours watched globally. More importantly, For the story we are telling, Wake Up Dead Man scores around 92% with critics and 94% with audiences on Rotten Tomatoes. 3 for 3, Knives Out, Glass Onion, Wake Up Dead Man, all critically praised, all enjoyed by viewers. No massive critic audience chasm, no calls for boycotts, just memes about Benoit's accent and theories about clues people missed. At this point, Johnson and Daniel Craig are already talking publicly about formulating ideas for a fourth Knives Out mystery. The Netflix money is still there, the audience is still there, and the baggage of The Last Jedi, while not gone, is no longer the only story attached to his name. So, how did we get from $450,000 Sundance experiment to $450 million Netflix deal? From a guy who directed both the highest-rated and one of the lowest-rated Breaking Bad episodes, to the man behind the most polarizing Star Wars film, to the creator of universally beloved murder mysteries, there's a pattern. First, intentional subversion as philosophy. Johnson doesn't just accept controversy, he designs for it. On The Last Jedi, he starts from the idea that comfort is the enemy of good storytelling. He says openly that he wanted to shake it up, that the worst sin would be to create something that handles Star Wars with kid gloves. That means heroes fail, legends crumble, mysteries are tossed aside, and for him, that's the point. Second, a specific pressure point, Luke Skywalker. Everything about the backlash ultimately orbits that character. Turn the franchise's foundational hero into a disillusioned, cynical exile who thinks the Jedi should end, and you are not just continuing a story, you're challenging 30-plus years of fan relationship. Fans watched Luke go from farm boy to Jedi in the 1980s and then spent decades imagining what he became afterward. Books, games, fanfics all filled that gap with variations on Jedi Grandmaster Luke, wise and powerful. Johnson shows up and says, actually, he failed so badly with his nephew that he considered murder, then ran away to die alone and tried to burn it all down. Critics praise the complexity. Many fans feel personally betrayed. Third, the philosophical rejection of Star Wars as sacred text. Luke and Kylo both advocate in their own ways for letting the past die. The movie keeps telling you to move on, question myths, break cycles. That's powerful if you go to Star Wars looking for challenging drama about institutions and faith. It's infuriating if you go because you love the institutions and myths in the first place. Fourth, personal ideology baked into a global franchise. Once Johnson starts talking about how his Christian upbringing and departure from evangelicalism shaped his approach to The Last Jedi, fans reframe the movie through that lens. What looked like weird choices now look to some like therapy in space. A lot of big franchise storytelling is personal, but most directors don't spell it out this clearly. Johnson does, and in doing so, he gives both his defenders and his haters new ammunition. And fifth, the audience versus critics split itself becomes part of his brand. The data is loud, 91% to 54% on The Last Jedi, 10 out of 10 and 7.8 out of 10 on Breaking Bad. Compare that to Knives Out's consistent harmony, strong critic scores, strong audience scores, healthy box office. The extremes seem to show up when he plays with beloved sandbox toys. When he's building his own toys, the crowd mostly cheers. So, is Rian Johnson really the most divisive director in Hollywood? You can argue that there are other contenders. Zack Snyder, for one. Michael Bay, maybe. But few filmmakers have numbers this stark. A $1.3 billion Star Wars installment that also has the biggest critic audience divide in the franchise. The only perfect 10 out of 10 TV episode on IMDb alongside one of the least loved in the same show. An independent debut made for $450,000, followed by a $450 million streaming deal. And then, a trilogy of original mysteries that somehow managed to please almost everyone. What makes Johnson different is not just that people disagree about his work, it's that he seems on some level okay with that, maybe even energized by it. When he walked into Star Wars, he treated it like a belief system that needed to be stress tested. When that belief system pushed back hard, the blowback didn't end his career. It pushed him into a better position, free to own his creations, free to insist on theatrical releases in a streaming era, free to call out AI as a hazard and still cash Netflix checks. He walked away from the biggest franchise in film and landed in a spot where he has both security and freedom. The director who divided Star Wars now makes murder mysteries that are, by almost every metric, the opposite of divisive. There's another irony there too. For all the think pieces about The Last Jedi breaking Star Wars, the film's legacy is weirdly resilient. 8 years later, people are still arguing about it. Entire YouTube channels revolve around it. Essays keep being written. New interviews, like his 2025 comments about Christianity and faith, keep reopening the wound. The movie refuses to fade into the background the way some safer sequels do. So, when you step back, Johnson's career ends up looking like one long argument about what big-budget storytelling is supposed to do. Should it honor expectations or disrupt them? Follow the hero's journey or question hero worship? Serve the fans or challenge them? And what happens when a director who believes in disruption gets plugged into a giant corporate machine that runs on predictability? If you were running a studio, you might look at this story and draw a very obvious lesson. Maybe don't hand your multi-billion-dollar nostalgia asset to a filmmaker whose stated goal is to shake the table. Maybe keep him on originals where swings don't risk setting your fan base on fire. But if you care about movies as more than comfort food, you might look at the same story and see something else. A guy who refused to sand down his edges, took one of the loudest backlashes in modern pop culture, and somehow turned that into a $450 million pact to keep making exactly the kind of stuff he likes. Rian Johnson didn't need to prove anything after The Last Jedi. He had already made a film that grossed $1.3 billion. He had already become a household name among fans. For better or worse, he could have gone quiet, taken safe jobs, disappeared into studio assignments. Instead, he proved something else, that being divisive on the biggest stage in the world doesn't have to be a death sentence. Sometimes, if you're stubborn enough, it's just the prologue. The guy who broke Star Wars now solves murders for a living, on streaming platforms watched by tens of millions. The backlash that was supposed to bury him ended up carving out exactly the space he needed. Somewhere between Brick's $450,000 and Netflix's $450 million, between Ozymandias and Fly, between 91% critics and 54% audience, you can see the shape of a career built on one uncomfortable question. Would you rather be loved by everyone for playing it safe, or argued about forever for taking a risk? Looking at where he is now, it's pretty clear which answer Rian Johnson chose.